I think you probably consider yourself a pretty open-minded person, right? Like if someone handed you this undeniable mathematical proof that your entire worldview was just, well, fundamentally flawed, you would change your mind.
Right. I mean, we all like to think we would do that.
Exactly. But what if your brain, on a strictly biological cellular level, literally cannot afford the calories to let you change your mind?
Yeah, that completely reframes how we think about, stubbornness or ignorance. We naturally tend to view resistance to new ideas as this sort of moral failing,
Yeah.
or maybe a lack of education.
Yeah, like they just don't get it.
Right. But framing it as an actual biological energy crisis, well, that shifts the entire paradigm. It makes our reluctance to accept these massive paradigm-shifting truths a question of survival biology, not just intellectual laziness.
And that biological reality is the exact hurdle we have to clear today on this deep dive. Because the material we are diving into is going to demand a lot of
Oh,
calories.
absolutely. It's a massive cognitive load.
It really is. We are exploring this massive, sprawling intellectual journey. It's a framework that took the author 47 years to build. 47 years.
That is basically a lifetime of work.
Right. And it culminates in what they call a complete quadrology. It's this four-part philosophical and a physical architecture that attempts to explain, well, literally everything.
And when you say everything, you mean everything.
I mean, the literal origin of the universe, the formation of our planet, the way cells first organized, all the way down to how you should structure your daily work.
It is a monumental undertaking, and to actually navigate this without getting completely lost, we have to be incredibly strict about how we look at these ideas.
Yeah, we need some guardrails here.
Exactly. The entire quadrology is structured around 4 distinct levels of emergence. If we mix these levels up, like if we try to apply the rules of planetary physics to human psychology, the whole framework just collapses into confusion.
Right, so let's just define those four levels right up front so you, the listener, have a map.
Good idea. First, there is NKE, which stands for Nichts-Kruste-Etwas.
That's German, right? Translates to Nothing-Crust-Something.
Yes, exactly. That is the absolute foundational ontology of the universe, the fundamental physics. Second, moving up a level, we have the SKT, the small bang theory.
Which sounds like the Big Bang, but smaller.
Well, it describes the specific structural evolution of our solar system and the genesis of life. Then third, we zoom in on the human scale with KLAS.
Okay, KLAS.
Right, it's a developmental life model for conscious beings seeking meaning. And finally, there is WAF, Wahrheit als Fundament, or truth as foundation.
Yeah.
This is the cognitive mechanism required to actually process all of this reality.
Okay, but before we get into the actual mechanics of this, I really need to give a quick heads up about the tone of this material.
Yeah, that's probably wise.
The author's worldview isn't just this, like, purely abstract, gentle, philosophical stroll. It contains some razor-sharp, highly critical views on modern Western society.
Very critical.
Yeah, critical of global geopolitics, bloated state bureaucracies, and basically the way the average person lives their life today. Some of the solutions proposed are, honestly, incredibly harsh by modern standards.
And that is a crucial point to establish right now. The author presents a blistering critique of what they see as the illusions of modern democratic states. They specifically target massive bureaucratic systems and argue that Western wealth is fundamentally built on the exploitation of the developing world.
Right, and our goal today is absolutely not to take a political side here. We aren't endorsing these views, and we aren't condemning them either.
Exactly. Our mission is just to impartially map out the exact arguments and the underlying logic the author has constructed over nearly half a century.
Right. We are just here to synthesize the mechanics of this dense material so you can evaluate these radical ideas entirely for yourself.
So we have the map. We have the universe, the solar system, the human, and the brain. But to actually understand any of this, we have to start backwards. We have to start with the brain. We have to start with wave truth as foundation.
Because, according to this framework, before you can understand the reality of the universe, you have to understand why human beings are so incredibly bad at seeing it.
Exactly. It all begins with that cognitive barrier we mentioned at the start. The author argues that even highly intelligent, highly educated people remain completely immune to insights that threaten their worldview.
Right. It's not a lack of logic.
No, it is an energetic blockade. In cognitive psychology, we talk about System 1, which is our fast, intuitive, automatic thinking, and System 2, which is our slow, deliberate, analytical thinking.
Right. So System 1 is like autopilot. It's tying your shoes, or knowing that 2 plus 2 is 4. You don't have to think about it.
Exactly. The author posits that every single intuitive association, every system one connection you have built up over your life to understand how society works must be actively wrestled down.
Wrestled down and rewired by system 2 if you are going to accept a fundamentally new truth.
Yes. And wrestling down those associations is exhausting.
It really is. Let me try an analogy here. Think of your worldview like a city's power grid. You have this old, somewhat inefficient grid that's your system 1. It keeps the lights on, the traffic lights work, you survive day to day.
Right, it functions well enough.
Yeah. Now, someone comes along and says, hey, we have a fundamentally better, completely revolutionary way to power the city. It's scientifically proven, but to install it, you have to tear up every single street.
Oh, wow.
You have to redirect all the traffic, shut off power to the hospitals temporarily, and spend billions of dollars. That massive infrastructure project is system 2.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Right. Like, why would the city council or your brain authorize that massive expenditure of energy if the old grid is technically keeping you alive?
That is a good starting point, but to make it fit the author's precise biological argument, we actually have to add the element of social consequence.
Oh, okay. Social consequence.
Yeah, it's not just the cost of tearing up the streets. It's that the mayor who authorizes tearing up the streets might get voted out of office before the new grid is even finished.
Oh, because of all the disruption. People get mad.
Exactly. The brain is a massive energy sink. It consumes a disproportionate amount of our daily calories. If the brain senses that rewiring its associations offers no immediate clear evolutionary advantage.
Or worse, if it fears that accepting this new truth will lead to a loss of social status.
Yes, if it risks isolations from the tribe or the destruction of one's core identity, it simply refuses to allocate the ATP. The cellular energy just isn't released to do the work.
So it doesn't just casually misunderstand the new information?
No, it literally cannot understand it. The biological and emotional cost is deemed fatal. The brain blocks the information to protect its energy reserves and its social standing.
Wow. Which explains so much about modern discourse. I mean, you can show someone undeniable logic, absolute physical proof of a concept, and they will just stare blankly at you. Or they get suddenly, inexplicably angry.
Right. They aren't choosing to be stubborn in that moment.
Exactly. They are experiencing a biological lockdown. The breaker tripped.
Precisely. The breaker tripped to save the house from catching fire. So the entire question of the quadrology hinges on this one thing. How do we overcome this biological lockdown?
And this is where the concept of WAF comes in, right? Truth as foundation.
Yes. To overcome the energy blockade, you have to fundamentally hack the brain's reward system.
Okay, walk me through that hack. How do you trick an organ that evolved to save energy into spending massive amounts of it?
By shifting your core identity. You see, most people define their identity by having a specific truth, like, I am a person who believes X, or I belong to political party Y.
Right, and if X or Y is threatened by new information, their very existence feels threatened.
Exactly. So WAF demands that you shift your identity away from the possession of truth and attach it entirely to the will to seek the truth. The identity becomes, I'm a person who ruthlessly pursues reality, whatever it happens to be, and I'm willing to destroy my own beliefs to get there.
That sounds noble, but how does that actually change the cellular energy equation we just talked about?
It changes the neurochemistry. The brain requires the emotional grounding of specific neurochemicals to do heavy lifting. It needs dopamine, which is the chemical associated with drive, seeking, and motivation.
Right, the pursuit chemical.
And it needs serotonin, which provides the deep satisfaction and social grounding of finding a solution. When your identity is tied to the seeking, every time you find a flaw in your own worldview, you get a dopamine hit.
Wait, really? You get rewarded for being wrong?
Yes. You actually get a serotonin reward for tearing down your own cognitive structures, because tearing them down proves you are fulfilling your identity as a truth seeker.
Wow. So suddenly, tearing up the city streets isn't a threat to the mayor's survival. It is the exact accomplishment the mayor is praised for. Tearing down the old grid becomes the reward itself.
Exactly. Without that constant chemical grounding, that internal reward for self-correction, the brain simply will not give individual cells the energy required to repeatedly think everything anew.
To discard old models and question everything again.
Right. The author states that this uncompromising will to truth is literally the only biological way out of self-deception.
Think about how radical a way to live that is. I mean, ask yourself, how often do you hold on to an opinion just because changing it feels too exhausting?
Probably more often than we'd like to admit.
Right. How often do you avoid a difficult conversation or a dense book because the mental energy required to process a totally new perspective feels like running a marathon in the mud?
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Yeah. The WUF framework demands that you run that marathon constantly and that you biologically train yourself to love the burn.
And the author notes that achieving a pure state of WAF is exceptionally rare. For most people, the process of seeking truth simply does not converge.
What do you mean by does not converge?
Well, it's a mathematical term, but applied to psychology here. Most people follow a logical path until they hit a point of extreme discomfort or social risk.
And then what happens?
At that point, their system one takes over to save them, and they retreat into what the author calls a patchwork of unprovable statements.
Oh, like when someone is losing an argument based on facts and suddenly they pivot to, well, it's just my intuition, or everything happens for a reason.
Exactly. They use metaphysical excuses or vague platitudes to wind their way out of logical contradictions. The logic fails to converge on a unified truth because they threw in a magic variable to escape the discomfort.
But for the strictly logical, deductive thinker operating with the chemical engine of RAF, the process actually converges,
Yes, they don't stop when it hurts. They follow the physical logic all the way down.
which provides the perfect bridge to our next level. Now that we understand the cognitive tool WEF that allows a human brain to accept massive paradigm shifts without shutting down, we can actually look at what this author spent 47 years shifting the paradigm toward.
Right, moving from the mind to the universe.
Exactly. We are zooming out from the human brain and stepping all the way down to the most fundamental emergence level of existence, the universe itself. This is the NKE theory, Nichts-Kruste-Etwas.
Nichts-Kruste-Etwas translates to Nothing-Crust-Something. This is the author's theory of everything, the toe. It is the absolute foundational ontology of the universe.
And we must be very careful here, as we established earlier, to respect the emergence level. We aren't talking about stars or planets yet, right?
No, not at all. We're not even talking about standard model particles. We're talking about the basic fundamental mechanism that allows existence to be a thing at all.
The core rule of NKE is brutally simple, but wrapping your head around it is tough. The author states, everything is just structure and nothingness.
Yes.
They describe the universe as a relativity theory on steroids, meaning everything is completely relative to everything else. Time, distance, gravity, forces. None of these exist as absolute independent background grids.
Exactly. They only exist in relation to the structures interacting. The foundational axiom here is structure touches structure. The NKE assumes absolutely no preconditions.
Let's unpack no preconditions. What does that actually mean for physics?
It means there is no external magical force setting the rules. There is no pre-existing framework of space and time waiting to be filled with matter, like an empty stage waiting for actors.
So the stage itself, the actors, the script, it all emerges purely from the interaction of structures.
Yes. The author posits a hypothetical inner mechanism for this interaction, which they call the Busfo process.
Okay, wait. What is the Busfo process? How do you get structure from literally nothingness?
Well, nothingness in this context isn't a magical void. It's just the absence of absolute metrics. The Busfo process is the author's attempt to mathematically and geometrically describe how fundamental subdimensional elements fold or interact to create the first relative boundaries.
The crust that separates something from nothing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the fascinating philosophical safeguard the author puts in place. They explicitly state that even if someone comes along in 50 years and proves that the specific mechanics of the Busfo process are wrong, the invariant of the NKE remains completely stable.
The invariant.
Yeah.
The part that cannot change.
Right. That invariant is the simple, unavoidable fact that everything emerges. If you strip away every metaphysical excuse, every dark matter placeholder, every magical creator, you are left with only one logical conclusion.
That reality is built entirely from the bottom up, through sheer relative interaction, structure touching structure.
Yes. Because if you say structure in nothingness touches structure in nothingness, the nothingness essentially cancels itself out in the equation.
Right, you can't measure nothingness. You can only measure the interaction between the two structures. But hold on, I have a massive problem with this.
What's the problem?
If you are claiming to have a theory of everything, a system that explains literally all of existence from the bottom up, well, how do you prove it? Because mathematically, hasn't it been proven that you can't prove a complete system from within the system itself?
You're referring to Gödel's incompleteness theorems.
Yes. Gödel proved that in any complex logical or mathematical system, there will always be statements that are true, but that cannot be proven strictly using the rules of that specific system. You always run into a logical wall where you have to step outside the system to verify it.
That is the classic dilemma, yeah.
So if the NKE is a theory of everything, there is no outside the system. So how can the author claim this works?
This is where the author tackles a monumental philosophical problem with a brilliant mathematical comparison. They argue that you don't prove a theory of everything by finding one magical foundational equation. You prove it through convergence.
Convergence, like coming together.
Yes. They compare the pursuit of ultimate truth to Euler's number, famously known as E.
Okay, let's break down E for a second.
Sure. Euler's number, E, is an irrational number, roughly 2.71828, and it goes on forever. You cannot express it as a simple finite fraction. You cannot write down the final decimal point.
Right, it's infinitely complex.
However, mathematically, you can prove that a specific sequence, the limit as n approaches infinity of 1 plus 1 over n to the power of n, converges upon it perfectly. You can define the limit exactly, even if the number itself is infinitely complex.
Oh, I see. So how does that apply to explaining the universe?
The author applies this concept of the limit to the theory of everything. You might not be able to point to a single isolated proof of the universe because, as Gödel showed, a single linear proof will always have gaps. But by attempting to explain literally everything across all levels of emergence in a completely connected relative system, you create a logically correct circular loop.
A closed loop. I think I see it. If every single piece of the puzzle, the physics, the biology, the psychology, relies entirely on the other pieces without ever requiring an external variable, you solve the ultimate philosophical dilemma. Who created the creator?
Exactly. If the system is a perfect self-sustaining loop of structure touches structure, it doesn't need an external creator to kickstart it.
Yeah.
The convergence of all these interconnected, non-contradictory explanations is what the author calls temporary absolute truth.
Temporary absolute. That sounds like an oxymoron.
It is deliberate.
Yeah.
It is absolute because it describes the complete closed system of reality without needing magic. But it is temporary because human understanding is always an ongoing, iterative process.
So like a better telescope or a better particle accelerator might refine how we understand the structures touching.
Right, but it won't change the absolute fact that they're touching.
It is a profound way to bypass the trap of metaphysics. Whenever human beings hit a wall in our scientific understanding, our System 1 tendency is to invent a metaphysical placeholder to ease the discomfort.
Yes, we hate not knowing.
Oh, galaxies are spinning too fast, must be invisible dark matter. Oh, the universe is expanding, must be dark energy. We just plug the gaps with ghosts.
And the NKE framework, powered by the cognitive discipline of WEF, demands that you stay within the physical reality. If there is a gap in the math, you don't fill it with magic.
You recognize that your understanding of how structure touches structure is simply incomplete, and you keep seeking. You endure the discomfort of not knowing.
Yes. So we have established the ultimate absolute baseline of existence, NKE. Pure structure interacting with pure structure in a closed relative loop.
Now we step up one level of emergence. How do those pure fundamental structures eventually fold and coalesce into the physical neighborhood we actually live in?
This is the domain of the SBT, the small bang theory.
Right. So the small bang theory is the author's explanation for the normal structure-building process that leads to the formation of suns, planets, moons, and eventually life, provided the thermal and chemical conditions are right.
They also extrapolate that this is highly likely the exact same fractal process that forms entire galaxies on a larger dimensional scale. But the most striking element of the SBT in this text isn't just the mechanism of accretion.
It's the timeline.
Yes, the timeline.
Yeah, this is a massive chronological claim. Let's look at what we are normally taught. Standard astrophysics says the solar system formed from a nebula, the sun ignited, the planets formed from the disk, Earth was a molten rock.
The standard model, right.
Then very early on, a Mars-sized object smashed into Earth, blowing off a chunk of debris that became the moon. The moon's gravity created massive tidal forces. Those tides sloshed the primordial oceans around, mixing chemicals and tidal pools, which eventually sparked biological life. Sun, Earth, moon, life.
The author insists on a radically different sequence. First the sun, then the Earth, then life, and finally the moon.
Let's pause here because this is massive. Sun, Earth, life, moon, the author's asserting that biological life emerged on Earth before the moon even existed.
Correct, which turns conventional evolutionary biology, chemistry, and early Earth geology completely upside down.
I mean, how does that even work? If there is no moon, there are no strong oceanic tides. We've always been told that the constant drying out and flooding of tidal pools, that wet-dry cycle, was the essential crucible for forcing amino acids to bond.
Yes, to form the first cellular structures.
Right. If you remove the moon, how do the chemicals mix? Doesn't the water just sit there in a stagnant puddle?
That is the immediate System 1 objection based on our current consensus. But if we apply the NKE logic structure touches structure, we have to look for other physical mechanisms of emergence that don't rely on the moon.
Okay, what kind of mechanisms?
Without the moon's stabilizing gravity, the early Earth's rotation would likely have been vastly different, possibly spinning much faster. A faster rotation means incredibly violent atmospheric winds and massive thermal gradients between the day and night sides of the planet.
Oh, I see. So instead of gravitational tides doing the mixing, you have hyperviolent weather systems, volcanic thermal events, and extreme solar radiation driving the chemical interactions.
Exactly. The author is suggesting that the spark of life is entirely independent of lunar tidal forces. The energy required to organize those initial biological structures came directly from the Earth-Sun dynamic.
Thermal energy, chemical gradients in deep-sea vents, atmospheric pressure.
Yes, these are all instances of structure touching structure in highly energetic ways.
It changes everything about how we picture the early Earth. It implies a vastly different timeline for abiogenesis, the origin of life. It means life is a direct, inevitable structural consequence of a planet being at the right distance from a star.
Rather than a lucky accident requiring a massive planetary collision to form a tide-generating moon.
It's a staggering thought. It really shows how tightly interconnected this quadrology is. You cannot separate the physical timeline of the SBT from the logical demands of the NKE.
They are completely woven together.
But let's keep moving up the ladder of emergence. We have the universe, we have the planet, and we have the origin of biological life. Now we reach the emergence level of conscious life, human beings.
Right? How is a conscious human supposed to navigate a reality that is just cold, physical structures interacting? How do we find meaning in that without going crazy?
This brings us to KLAS. Camel, Low, Adler, Schildkröte. Camel, Lion, Eagle, Turtle. It is a developmental life model specifically designed for conscious humans who recognize this physical reality but still want to lead a meaningful, productive existence.
Let's briefly touch on the 4 stages so the listener knows what they are.
Sure.
The camel represents the phase of carrying the burdens of society, learning the rules, taking on responsibilities without questioning them. The lion is the phase of rebellion, where the individual realizes the rules are often arbitrary and fights against the societal constraints.
And the turtle.
The turtle is the final phase of withdrawal, reflecting on wisdom, but the text focuses overwhelmingly on the pursuit and maintenance of the eagle phase.
What makes the eagle the ideal state?
The eagle represents true inner freedom, immense discipline, and the stamina to endure resistance over the long term. An eagle has the perspective to fly high and see the vast interconnected landscape of reality, the NKE and SBT mechanics.
But they also possess the physical strength and predatory focus to dive down and act decisively within that reality.
Precisely. But to be an eagle, to actually achieve that freedom, you have to interact with a society that is constantly trying to drag you back down to a camel.
Right. And this brings up a really deep philosophical conflict within the author's work. How do you practically achieve independence in a modern world?
The author explores this by contrasting 2 fundamentally different paths to independence. The first is the path of Diogenes of Sinope, the ancient Greek philosopher.
Diogenes is the guy who famously gave up all his possessions, lived in a giant ceramic jar in the marketplace, and supposedly walked around with a lantern during the day looking for an honest man.
Yes, that's him. His philosophy of freedom was based on radical reduction. He argued that if you own nothing, you have nothing to lose. Therefore, no one can blackmail you, the state cannot tax you, and no one can control your behavior.
It is a path of extreme ascetic independence, and to prove his detachment, he would flout all social conventions, eating raw meat, insulting politicians to their faces, completely unbound by consequence.
The other path is the author's chosen path, which is symbolized by the moat, or Berggraben in German. Instead of radical reduction, the moat is a strategy of radical diversification and competence.
So you don't give up your possessions?
No, you build immense redundancy in your life. You build multiple streams of income, you master hard-to-replace technical skills, you cultivate a wide, genuine network of relationships.
And the author provides a devastating critique of the Diogenes model using their own physical logic. The core flaw of the ascetic hermit, according to this framework, is that they lack skin in the game.
Skin in the game. Nassim Taleb talks a lot about this. It means being exposed to the consequences of your actions.
Exactly. By completely retreating from the world, from ownership, from complex relationships, from societal responsibilities, the hermit loses direct, painful contact with physical reality.
Because they have insulated themselves from consequence, their philosophy inevitably becomes abstract, sterile, and cynical. They become a spectator of life, criticizing the players on the field, rather than an active participant.
It's like playing a complex video game. Diogenes is playing on God mode. He literally cannot take damage. His health bar is infinite because he has nothing to lose.
That's a perfect analogy.
The moat builder, the eagle, is playing on the absolute hardest difficulty setting, but they have spent thousands of hours grinding to forge the best armor, master the combat mechanics, and hoard healing potions.
Right, and to take that further, the guy playing on the hard difficulty, the moat builder, knows exactly how much it costs to repair that armor. He knows the underlying math of the game because he suffers when he makes a mistake.
Yeah.
The player on God mode can critique the game all they want, but they don't actually understand the mechanics anymore because they aren't subject to them. Only the player embedded in consequence truly understands the reality of the game.
That makes so much sense. The moat builder stays in the world. They feel the economic forces, the temptations, and the pains of reality, but they remain free because of their redundancy.
They aren't independent because they have nothing to lose. They are independent because they have so many options that the loss of any single one cannot destroy them.
And this fundamentally changes the value of truth within human relationships. The author notes that the Diogenes figure can tell the harsh truth to someone because they simply don't care if they offend them.
Right, they have no ties to sever. It is a cheap, risk-free honesty. But the moat builder's honesty is infinitely more valuable.
Because they have skin in the game. The author says that telling a friend or a colleague the harsh truth is the highest form of respect. If you have built a moat, you could be hurt by losing that relationship. You have something on the line.
But your redundancy, the fact that you have other friends, other clients, other support systems, means you know you can survive the loss. Therefore, you choose to tell the truth despite the risk, rather than because there is no risk.
It makes the honesty a conscious, powerful choice rather than an act of nihilistic resignation.
And notice how this connects directly back to Wolff. The moat builder is living out truth as foundation in real time. They are constantly aligning their life with physical reality, accepting the harsh consequences, and using their hard-earned skills to navigate them.
Which naturally leads us to a massive question about modern life. If the moat builder must stay actively engaged in the world and must build real, tangible skills to have skin in the game, well, what kind of work actually builds that moat? Because most of us aren't forging literal armor.
We need to talk about the nature of work and identity. The author looks back at history and points out that in the past, individuals gained their unique identity through hard-to-replace physical skills.
Like a blacksmith, a miller, a master carpenter.
Yes. They weren't just anonymous cogs in the machine. Their specific, tangible competence gave them an undeniable identity and immediate economic value in their community. The author calls this Fähigkeitenbasiert Individuierung, or skills-based individuation.
But today, the author argues, we have entirely lost that. We have constructed massive, bloated bureaucratic systems where millions of people do highly abstract digital work.
Right.
If you are pushing spreadsheets in a massive corporate compliance department or managing middle-tier logistics for a government agency, you are largely replaceable. There are 10,000 other people who could be trained to click the same buttons.
And when your work is completely replaceable, your identity erodes. You lose that deep psychological sense of self-worth that comes from undeniable physical competence.
To understand the author's proposed solution, we have to unpack their definition of power. It's a brilliant, highly grounded concept. In German, the phrase is Macht kommt von machen.
Power comes from making or doing. It is a linguistic and philosophical connection. True power in this framework isn't about political titles or how many direct reports you have or manipulating abstract financial instruments.
Right. True power is direct, unmediated control and competence over physical reality.
A mechanic has power over a broken engine. A surgeon has power over a biological organ. A farmer has power over the soil. True power, and the profound happiness and identity that comes with it, arises from close, direct contact with the materials, tools, and the people you directly serve.
It is undeniable. You either fixed the engine or you didn't. You can't bullshit an engine.
The author references a quote by the British comedian John Cleese, who once observed that only about 10% of people are genuinely, profoundly good at their jobs.
Only 10%.
Yeah. The author uses this observation to draw a razor-sharp distinction between strong and weak individuals in a society. The strong person, the 10%, who build their moat through skills-based individuation, is content with what they earn through their honest, tangible work.
They provide clear value to the physical world, and they accept the fair return for it.
But the weak person, according to this framework, constantly seeks to deceptively extract more from the system than their actual skills deserve.
Because they lack the tangible abilities to build true power, because they can't fix the engine, they rely on manipulation, credentialism, bureaucracy, and office politics to survive.
They hide in the abstract layers of the system to mask their lack of fundamental capability.
And this dynamic creates a severe cascading societal imbalance, which brings us to the emergence level of society itself. If modern bureaucratic abstract systems actively destroy skills-based individuation, and if they empower the weak to continually extract energy from the strong, how does the author propose we fix it?
This is where we get into the author's blueprint for a breakaway society, the self-orchestrated Morgenthau Plan. Now, historically, the Morgenthau Plan was a post-World War II proposal by the U.S. Treasury Secretary to completely deindustrialize Germany.
Right, to turn it into a pastoral agricultural state to prevent them from ever fighting a war again?
Exactly. But the author reclaims and adapts this term, spelling it Morgenthau like the morning dew, to describe a radical regional resilience strategy.
It is crucial to understand that this is not a call for state-mandated deindustrialization, and it is certainly not a return to the primitive Dark Ages.
No, not at all. It is a voluntary, self-orchestrated return to modern, highly technical agriculture, forestry, and local craftsmanship. The ultimate goal of the Morgenthau Plan is profoundly physical. Human beings should be fit, healthy, and clever.
So what does this actually look like for the average person listening to this? The author presents an incredible, almost romantic ideal: the Tuscan wine farmer.
It's a very evocative image.
Imagine a life where you work with your hands during the day tending vines, understanding the precise chemistry of the soil, repairing automated irrigation systems, engaging directly with the physical reality of nature.
And then by night, you sit in the piazza discussing advanced philosophy, physics, and the NKE with your community.
You have the health and physical grounding of manual labor combined with the intellectual rigor of an eagle.
It is the ultimate synthesis of the quadrology. Physical power Mach kommt von Machen, combined with cognitive pursuit Waff. But the author is deeply realistic, even cynical, about the obstacles preventing this ideal.
What are the main obstacles?
They identify three major enemies to the Morgenthau Plan: global corporations that want to replace local value with anonymous, fragile supply chains. Then, the inner Schweinehund, which is our own biological laziness and desire for absolute comfort.
And the third?
And finally, the modern state apparatus.
The text contains a very harsh, unsparing view of the state, specifically calling out the German state as an example. The author points out that there are roughly 6 million state workers in Germany clinging to their chairs.
From the author's perspective, this massive bureaucratic apparatus creates an inescapable web of taxes, regulations, rules, and dependencies that actively punishes the strong, independent creator.
In the language of the quadrology, the state is seen as a massive mechanism that extracts physical energy from those doing tangible work in order to support those doing abstract, replaceable work.
To combat this, the self-orchestrated Morgenthau Plan isn't about staging a violent revolution or protesting in the streets. It is about building parallel, state-free structures.
It is about individuals quietly stepping away from the bureaucratic web and establishing 100% true property ownership. The author advocates for a system where property is owned outright, without recurring property taxes, creating an absolute physical moat where the individual is functionally sovereign.
And here we reach a detail that is incredibly stark and essential to the brutal logic of the framework: the right of mercy.
Oh boy. In this proposed society of strong, independent creators, what happens to those who cannot or will not work?
The author explicitly addresses this. They argue that the community should provide only the absolute bare minimum for physical survival for these individuals, literally described in the text as a bowl of rice, water, and a shared sleeping hall.
Okay, pause. I know anyone listening right now is probably wincing at that. A bowl of rice and a sleeping hall. That sounds incredibly harsh to modern Western sensibilities.
It is extremely harsh.
But let's look at this strictly through the author's lens of physics and biology. If you remove modern ethical emotion, what is the exact mathematical logic they are applying here?
The logic is based on evolutionary biology and energy conservation. The author uses the metaphor of cuckoo chicks and songbirds. A cuckoo bird lays its egg in a songbird's nest. When the cuckoo hatches, it is massive and incredibly demanding.
And the songbird just takes care of it.
Yes, the exhausted songbird works itself to death, flying back and forth, feeding this giant parasitic cuckoo chick, often at the direct expense of its own offspring. The author views the bloated modern welfare state and the massive administrative bureaucracy as the cuckoo chick and the hardworking, skilled individuals, the 10%, who actually make things as the songbirds.
So, by reducing societal support to absolute basic physical survival, the right of mercy, the author argues you eliminate the economic incentive for the weak to deceptively extract resources from the strong.
You force people out of the comfortable illusions of bureaucratic abstraction and back into the physical reality where they have to develop tangible skills, where Macht kommt dann machen.
Exactly. It is harsh, but within the strictly logical physical framework of NKE and Wolff, the author views it as the only mathematically fair and thermodynamically sustainable system over the long term.
But how does a society actually transition to this without a collapse or a bloody revolution? Because, as the author notes, the elites and the state apparatus hold the true power of fiat money and military force.
They aren't just going to hand over the keys and say, sure, go be tax-free Tuscan wine farmers.
No, they're not. This brings us to a fascinating civic mechanism proposed by the author: economic elections and the dismantling of Western illusions.
How does an economic election work?
Instead of voting for political parties, which the author views as nothing more than ideological theater designed to distract the masses, citizens would vote on purely mathematical algorithms.
Wait, voting on algorithms?
You would have an election where you don't vote for a person. You vote on the exact percentages of the state budget. For example, the aggregate vote of the population decides that 10% of tax revenue goes to the military, 5% to administration, 15% to infrastructure, and so on.
Okay, so I pull out my phone on election day and I just adjust sliders for the national budget. But how does that actually shrink the bureaucracy?
Because of the pool formula. This is the genius of the moat applied to civics. The total pool of money for state salaries is fixed mathematically by that percentage vote.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If the citizens vote to shrink the administration budget from 10% to 5%, the salaries of all those 6 million state workers shrink automatically via the algorithm. The pool of money is fixed. If the pool shrinks, everyone in that sector takes a pay cut.
Oh, wow. It's the ultimate skin in the game for bureaucrats. You strip away the political ideology, the lobbying, the union negotiations, and replace it with unbribable mathematics.
Exactly. If the state workers want more money, they have to physically prove their value to the productive citizens to convince them to voluntarily vote a higher percentage of their taxes to administration.
And if the taxes get too high, the strong citizens just retreat into their completely tax-free property moats, reducing their taxable income, and the state revenues drop anyway.
It creates a self-regulating physical limit on the size and extraction power of the state. And this domestic policy is deeply tied to the author's geopolitical critique. As we warned at the beginning, the author's view of the global West is unsparing.
They argue that modern Western democracies are fundamentally illusions, structurally identical to ancient Greece.
Let's break down that ancient Greece comparison.
Sure, in ancient Athens they had democracy, and we celebrate it as the birthplace of freedom. But it was a democracy only for a very small, elite percentage of male citizens.
Right. The vast majority of the population were peasants, foreigners, or literal slaves who had absolutely no voice.
And their grueling physical labor is what allowed the elite citizens to sit around the agora debating philosophy.
The author claims that today's Western wealth operates on the exact same model, just scaled globally. The West's high standard of living, our cheap electronics, our out-of-season fruit, our massive welfare states, it is all built on the physical exploitation, brain drain, and cheap labor of 7 billion people in developing nations.
In this framework, we in the West are the elite citizens of ancient Greece, and we simply outsource the physical suffering and the environmental destruction to the rest of the globe so we don't have to look at it.
In this view, the voting public in the West isn't participating in a noble democratic process. The author calls them voting cattle that merely legitimize this global exploitation.
The populace wants the comfort of the collective, they want the cheap goods, and they want the state to protect them from physical reality, so they vote to maintain the illusion.
This is exactly why the author draws such a hard, distinct line between an anti-voter and an independent thinker.
I really want to emphasize this distinction because it is so relevant right now. An anti-voter is someone who is angry at the current government or the current system, so they just reflexively adopt the narrative of the loudest opposition party.
They think they're being rebellious, they think they are awake, but they are still just buying a pre-packaged narrative off the shelf.
They are still avoiding the energetic biological cost of System 2 thinking. They traded one illusion for another.
A true independent thinker, the eagle operating with Wave, doesn't buy narratives off the shelf. They build their own narrative from the ground up, starting from the absolute fundamental physics of reality.
Which is precisely why the author spent 47 years building the NKE, the SDT, and KLAS. They refused to accept the metaphysical excuses of the scientific consensus, and they refused to accept the political illusions of the West.
They applied truth as foundation to every single level of emergence until they had a logically sound, completely closed loop of reality where structure touches structure and consequences are physical.
So we have mapped this massive architecture. We have the cognitive tool, the universe, the genesis of life, the human model, and the societal blueprint. The question now is, if this entire framework is true, what happens next? Where does this actually go in the real world?
This brings us to the future possibilities of the quadrology. The author views this entire 47-year project not just as a philosophical text to sit on a dusty shelf, but as an enabling meta-platform.
It is a fundamental operating system, like iOS or Windows, upon which actual practical ventures can be built in the physical world. They outline several ideas for startups based on this reality.
Imagine, for instance, a more gentile logistics platform.
How would that work?
Instead of massive, fragile global supply chains that rely on exploiting the developing world and burning bunker fuel across oceans, this tech platform would directly connect local Tuscan wine farmers, regenerative agriculture specialists, and highly skilled craftsmen directly to local consumers.
It uses high-tech digital efficiency to completely bypass the state taxation grid and the megacorporations, creating a resilient, localized economy.
Or imagine a KLAS academy, a completely new kind of educational institution. It would actively reject the modern university pipeline that turns out indebted students ready for abstract, bureaucratic, bullshit jobs.
Instead, a KLAS academy would combine cutting-edge, high-tech knowledge with intense, grueling physical labor. It would train people to be eagles physically fit, technically proficient in mechanics or agriculture, and philosophically grounded in physical reality. It teaches actual skills-based individuation.
Then there is the concept of Berggraben consulting, a highly specialized, perhaps secretive service designed to help individuals build their moat, helping people set up state-free redundancies, multiple income streams across different jurisdictions, and acquire hard physical assets so they can look the system in the eye, speak the truth, and not fear economic ruin.
But perhaps the most fascinating and terrifying technological application is the idea of a WAF master prompt.
Yes. Imagine a specialized artificial intelligence filter. But instead of being trained on the biased, politically correct, often contradictory data of the open internet, it is trained exclusively on the massive, unyielding logic of the NKE and KLAS.
You could feed this AI business plans, political narratives, or new scientific theories, and it would ruthlessly test them against the fundamental rules of physical reality. It would act as an unbribable, high-speed system, too, for humanity.
It would instantly strip away all metaphysical excuses, magical thinking, and logical contradictions. It would just spit back. This violates the law of energy conservation, or this assumes an external metaphysical variable.
But the implications of the quadrology go way beyond startups and AI. If the foundational physics of NKE and the planetary timeline of SBT are actually accurate, the entire global scientific establishment is facing a paradigm-shifting earthquake.
It would require a total rewrite of the hard sciences. Let's just look at the timeline. Sun, Earth, life, moon. If that is true, it means that thousands of geology and biology PhDs need to be fundamentally thrown out.
Geologists would have to entirely rethink the Earth's early stratigraphy, its atmospheric pressure, and its climate models without the stabilizing presence of the moon's gravity.
Biologists and zoologists would have to completely reinvent the models for abiogenesis. If the first cellular structures emerged without tidal pools acting as the mixing bowls, What were the precise chemical and thermal mechanisms? It changes the entire physical landscape of early Earth research.
And think about theoretical physics. The NKE says structure touches structure, and emergence is the only invariant. If the Busfo process, or something like it, is the baseline reality, physicists at the CERN particle accelerator could stop smashing protons together looking for dark matter.
The author views dark matter as nothing more than a metaphysical placeholder to explain away bad math. Instead, CERN could run entirely new experiments aimed at proving how fundamental structure interacts and folds in nothingness.
It is a complete reorientation of the scientific method, dragging it back from abstract mathematics to physical relational limits.
It is a breathtaking scope. The quadrology is an attempt to completely unify ontology, astrophysics, evolutionary biology, cognitive psychology, sociology, and economics into a single, unbreakable, closed chain of logic.
It really is staggering. Let's just take a breath and look at the sheer scale of the terrain we've covered today. We started with the biological calorie budget of your brain and the chemical dopamine engine required to let you change your mind without panicking.
From there, we step down into the absolute physics of nothingness, where structure touches structure in a relative loop that requires no creator. We watch the early Earth form, followed immediately by biological life driven by the sun, and only later, the arrival of the moon.
Then we climbed back up the ladder of emergence to the conscious human, navigating this physical reality as an eagle, building an impregnable moat of tangible skills and relationships so they can endure the truth.
And finally, we mapped out a blueprint for a breakaway society of physically fit, philosophically sharp Tuscan wine farmers, starving out a bloated, parasitic, bureaucratic state through unbribable economic algorithms and the harsh reality of the right of mercy.
All of it bound together by one uncompromising rule: truth as foundation.
The architecture is vast, but the underlying mechanism is remarkably, elegantly consistent. At every single level, from the cosmos down to the individual human life, the framework demands that we strip away illusions, avoid inventing metaphysical excuses when we get confused, and embrace the hard, physical reality of consequences.
As we wrap up this massive journey, there's one specific concept from the quadrology that I think serves as the perfect, most immediate lens to examine our own lives right now. It's the phrase we discussed earlier. Macht kommt von machen. Power comes from making. Power comes from doing.
If we connect this concept to the bigger picture of the modern world, it raises an incredibly uncomfortable but vital question for anyone living in our highly abstracted digital society.
Exactly. I want you to look around at your own life right now. Think about your job. Think about your daily routine. Think about your core identity. How much of your existence currently relies entirely on abstract systems?
How much of your livelihood depends on digital files, bureaucratic permissions, corporate structures, and global supply chains that you have never seen, do not understand, and could never replicate if they broke down?
Imagine if the entire internet went down tomorrow. Not for an hour, but permanently. And imagine the state apparatus simply paused for a month. No direct deposits, no compliance departments, no digital HR portals. What would remain of your identity?
What tangible, physical, unexchangeable skills do you possess that would grant you power and relevance in a strictly physical world?
Are you the blacksmith? Are you the mechanic who can actually fix the engine? Are you the Tuscan wine farmer who understands the soil? Are you a creator who has built a deeply fortified moat, standing firmly on the foundation of physical truth? Or if the digital illusion suddenly drops, will you find that you are living in a fragile, artificial reality, entirely dependent on extracting the energy of others just to survive?
It is a deeply uncomfortable question to ask yourself. But remember the core lesson of WAF. Discomfort is not a signal to retreat. Discomfort is the exact biological signal that you are approaching a vital truth.
That's exactly right. If your System 1 is currently screaming at you to reject that question, to write this all off as crazy, to save energy and protect your current worldview, well, maybe that's exactly why you need to ask it. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into a truly monumental intellectual architecture. Keep building your moat, keep demanding the truth no matter the calorie cost, and keep pushing your brain to do the heavy lifting. We'll see you next time.